The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. I was reviewing quarterly reports from my investment portfolio when Dad's name flashed across my screen. "Melissa," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he was about to deliver bad news disguised as a reasonable decision. "We need to talk about my birthday party." I set down my pen. Dad's 60th birthday had been marked on my calendar for months. Carol, his wife of 2 years, had been planning an elaborate celebration at her new restaurant, Prestige Dining Group. The grand opening and his birthday party were being combined into one event. "What about it?" I asked. "Well, Carol's made some decisions about the guest list." He paused. "Her investors will be there. Important people from the restaurant industry. Food critics. Her business partners." I waited. I'd learned years ago that with Dad the cruelest parts always came after the setup. "She thinks, and I agree, that it would be better if you didn't attend." His words came faster now, as if speed would soften the blow. "It's nothing personal. It's just that Carol's grand opening is my birthday weekend. Her investors will be there. She doesn't want them meeting someone like you. Someone like me." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. "Someone who takes public transit," he continued, filling the silence I refused to break. "Someone who lives in a small apartment. Someone who works an entry-level job at 32 years old. Carol's worked incredibly hard to build her brand, and this opening is crucial. First impressions matter in her industry." "I understand," I said quietly. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this." Relief flooded his voice. "Maybe we can do a small dinner, just the two of us, the following week." "Sure, Dad." "You're not upset?" "Would it matter if I were?" "Melissa, don't be dramatic. This is business. When you're older, you'll understand how these things work." I was 32. He still spoke to me like I was 12. After we hung up, I sat in the dimly lit living room of my small apartment. A modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood that I'd deliberately chosen for its anonymity. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but I kept the curtains drawn most evenings. Privacy had become precious to me over the years. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Richard Chin, my investment advisor at Pinnacle Wealth Management. "Richard, effective immediately, withdraw all capital from Prestige Dining Group. Complete the transaction by end of business tomorrow. No exceptions. M. Anderson." I hit send. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of wine, and said nothing. My relationship with my father had always been complicated by his need for appearances. When I was growing up, he'd been a mid-level insurance salesman who drove a leased BMW and wore expensive suits he couldn't quite afford. Mom had been the practical one, the steadying force who kept our household running while Dad chased the image of success. She died when I was 19, 2 weeks before I started my sophomore year at community college. Dad remarried within a year, to Linda, a woman who shared his obsession with status. That marriage lasted 3 years before she left him for someone with actual wealth rather than the performance of it. Carol was wife number 3. She was 45, ambitious, and had spent the last decade building a reputation as a chef and restaurateur. Her first restaurant had been successful enough. The second had received critical acclaim. Prestige Dining Group was supposed to be her crowning achievement, a high-end establishment targeting wealthy clientele and corporate events. Dad had positioned himself as her supportive husband, the man behind the woman. He'd started dressing better, speaking differently, name-dropping Carol's connections at every opportunity. He'd sold his modest house and moved into Carol's upscale condo. He'd reinvented himself entirely. And I apparently didn't fit the narrative. The thing was, I understood his perspective. In his world, I was a disappointment. I'd dropped out of community college after Mom died. I'd worked a series of what he called dead-end jobs: retail, food service, administrative work. I'd never pursued the corporate career path he'd envisioned for me. I took public transit. I lived modestly. I didn't attend his social events or schmooze with his new circle of friends. What he didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I'd left college to pursue an opportunity that had nothing to do with a degree. At 19, grieving my mother and drowning in community college classes I couldn't afford to care about, I'd started coding. It began as an escape, building websites for small businesses, learning programming languages late into the night, losing myself in the logic of it all. One of my clients was a startup founder who saw potential in a customer service platform I'd built as a side project. He offered me a partnership stake. I took it. I also took a leave of absence from school that became permanent. The platform, Customer First Solutions, scaled faster than any of us anticipated. Within 2 years we had contracts with mid-sized companies. Within 4 we were servicing Fortune 500 clients. By the time I was 25, we'd been acquired by a larger tech firm for $47 million. My stake netted me $8.2 million after taxes. I could have stopped there. Instead, I used that money to fund other startups, to invest in commercial real estate, to build a diversified portfolio that generated passive income most people couldn't fathom. I became an angel investor, backing promising entrepreneurs who reminded me of my younger self. I sat on boards. I consulted. And I did it all quietly, deliberately, without fanfare. I kept my small apartment. I took public transit because parking downtown was absurd and I didn't need the hassle. I worked from home most days, dressed in comfortable clothes, living a life that looked ordinary from the outside. I'd learned from watching my father that the performance of success was exhausting and often hollow. I'd chosen substance over show. I'd also chosen privacy. After Customer First was acquired, I'd dealt with the uncomfortable attention that came with sudden wealth. The friends who reappeared, the family members who suddenly found reasons to reconnect, the strangers who wanted pieces of my success. I'd learned to be selective about who knew the full picture of my life. My father wasn't on that list. He'd spent my entire adult life dismissing my choices, criticizing my lifestyle, comparing me unfavorably to the children of his friends. The few times I'd tried to share my success, he'd dismissed it. That tech bubble stuff never lasts, he'd said when I mentioned an investment. Real success is traditional careers, Melissa. So I'd stopped trying. Let him believe what he wanted. It was easier that way. What Dad also didn't know was that when Carol was seeking funding for Prestige Dining Group 18 months ago, she'd pitched dozens of potential investors. Her business plan was solid. Her track record was proven. But she needed $3.1 million to secure the prime downtown location, complete the high-end renovations and cover operating expenses for the first year. She'd found 20 small investors willing to contribute between $50,000 and $200,000 each. But she needed an anchor investor, someone willing to commit substantial capital and signal confidence to the others. That investor was me. Anonymous, operating through Pinnacle Wealth Management's investment fund. Richard had brought me the opportunity, Carol never knowing the identity of her largest backer. I'd reviewed her business plan carefully. It was good. The numbers worked. The location was prime. Her reputation would draw initial crowds. I'd approved the investment not because of any connection to my father. I hadn't even known he was dating her seriously at the time, but because it was sound business. That $3.1 million wasn't a gift or a loan. It was a structured investment with equity stake, performance benchmarks and clearly defined terms. If Prestige Dining Group succeeded, I'd see substantial returns. If it failed, I'd lost the capital but learned from the experience. When Dad announced his engagement to Carol 6 months after my investment, I'd been surprised. When I'd quietly verified that she was indeed the same Carol Henderson from the Prestige Dining Group business plan, I'd been amused. When Dad started bragging about Carol's success and her wealthy investors while dismissing my own career, I'd been bemused. I'd never told him. Why would I? It would have required explaining the entirety of my financial situation, and frankly, I didn't owe him that information. He was content believing I was his disappointing daughter who worked some vague office job and lived paycheck to paycheck. I was content letting him believe it. Until the phone call about his birthday party. Richard Chin called me at 8 o'clock the next morning. Melissa, I got your email about Prestige Dining Group. His voice was professional but curious. Just to confirm, you want to withdraw the full $3.1 million investment? That's correct. The restaurant opens this weekend. This will likely cause significant operational problems. I understand. May I ask why? The business is performing exactly to projections. The grand opening is generating substantial buzz. This is positioned to be very successful. I took a sip of coffee. The investment no longer aligns with my portfolio strategy. Richard was too professional to push further. Understood. I'll initiate the withdrawal process immediately. Per the investment agreement, We're required to provide 72 hours notice. The funds will be pulled by end of business Friday. That's fine. This will terminate your equity position entirely. If the restaurant succeeds. I'm aware of the implications, Richard. Process the withdrawal. Understood. I'll send confirmation once it's complete. After we hung up, I made myself breakfast and worked through my normal morning routine. I had 2 board meetings that afternoon via video conference and a pitch from a promising AI startup to review. Life continued as usual. I didn't think much about Carol's phone exploding with calls. I didn't imagine the panic that would set in as her primary investor, anonymous but absolutely essential, suddenly pulled funding 3 days before her grand opening. I simply moved on to the next thing. The first sign came Thursday morning. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Melissa Anderson? The woman's voice was professional but stressed. This is Jennifer Martinez from Prestige Dining Group. I'm Carol Henderson's business manager. Carol gave me your number as an emergency contact for your father. Is my father all right? He's fine physically, but we have a situation. Carol's primary investor has withdrawn funding effective tomorrow. The investor was anonymous, operating through a wealth management firm, but their capital represents nearly 70% of our funding structure. Without it, we cannot open on Saturday. That's unfortunate, I said carefully. Your father suggested you might know people in investment circles. Anyone who might be interested in a last-minute opportunity. The business plan is solid, the location is. I'm sorry, I interrupted gently. I don't have those kinds of connections. The lie came easily. Jennifer thanked me anyway and hung up, desperation clear in her voice. My father called 30 minutes later. Melissa, Carol's in crisis mode. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Her investor pulled out. Some anonymous fund through a wealth management company. They're destroying everything she's worked for. That's terrible, Dad. She's trying to find replacement funding, but everyone's saying it's too late. The opening is Saturday. There are 200 confirmed guests. Food critics. Industry people. This will ruin her reputation if she cancels. What does this have to do with me? I thought, maybe you could ask around? Someone at your office might know investors. I almost laughed. My office was my spare bedroom. Dad, I work in customer service coordination. I don't exactly run in investment circles. Right. His voice deflated. Of course. I just thought, never mind. I hope Carol figures something out. Yeah. Listen, about my birthday party. Obviously it's postponed now. Maybe cancelled entirely. Carol's devastated. I understand. I'll call you later. He hung up. I returned to reviewing the AI startup's pitch deck. Saturday arrived. I spent the morning at a coffee shop downtown working on my laptop. Around noon my phone started buzzing with texts. First from my Aunt Linda, Dad's sister. Did you hear about Carol's restaurant? Supposedly there was some big investor drama. The opening is still happening, but everyone's saying it's a disaster waiting to happen. Then from my cousin James. Your dad's wife's restaurant thing is trending on local Twitter. Not in a good way. I opened Twitter. Hashtag Prestige Dining Group was indeed trending locally. The story had leaked. A restaurant opening without proper funding, investors pulling out last minute, possible financial mismanagement. The food blogger community was having a field day. How does an experienced restaurateur lose 70% of funding 3 days before opening? One popular account posted. Red flags everywhere. Carol had clearly decided to proceed with the grand opening anyway, hoping to salvage her reputation through sheer force of will. The event was still scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. Dad's birthday celebration would presumably still happen, though I imagine the mood would be significantly different than planned. I ordered another coffee and kept working. At 3 o'clock Richard Chin called. The withdrawal completed yesterday as scheduled, he confirmed. All capital has been returned to your primary account. Prestige Dining Group no longer has any claim to those funds. Thank you, Richard. I'm watching the situation unfold on social media. Quite the mess. Indeed. For what it's worth, your timing was impeccable. If the restaurant survives this PR disaster, it will take years to recover investor confidence. If it survives. Exactly. We talked briefly about reallocating the returned capital. I was considering a promising biotech startup, and then I returned to my quiet Saturday afternoon. Sunday morning, Dad called. We need to talk. In person. It's important. His voice carried an edge I'd rarely heard, not anger but something close to panic. When? I asked. Now. Can you come to the condo? I hesitated. Carol's condo, their condo now, was across town. But the urgency in his voice was real. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I took an Uber. When I arrived, Dad answered the door looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His expensive shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. Thank you for coming. He led me to the living room where Carol sat on the couch, her laptop open, phone beside her. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. Melissa. She nodded stiffly. We'd met perhaps 4 times in the 2 years she'd been married to my father. Our interactions had been polite but distant. Carol. I sat in the chair across from them. I'm sorry about your opening. That must have been incredibly stressful. Stressful doesn't begin to cover it. Her voice was tight. The event itself went well enough. The food was excellent, the critics were impressed. But the financial situation has overshadowed everything. We're trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. Dad leaned forward. Carol's been trying to figure out who pulled the funding. The wealth management company won't reveal their client's identity, privacy agreements, but someone clearly wanted to sabotage her. I said nothing. The timing is suspicious, Carol continued. The withdrawal happened Thursday morning. We've been trying to piece together if anyone had a motive to damage the restaurant. And? I asked. We can't figure it out. The investor was anonymous from the beginning. They came through Pinnacle Wealth Management's investment fund. Professional, by the book, zero personal interaction. Just capital and legal paperwork. Dad stood pacing. There has to be a reason. Maybe a competitor? Another restaurateur who wanted that location? Carol shook her head. I've made calls. Everyone in the industry is as surprised as I am. This kind of last-minute withdrawal is career-ending for an investor's reputation. No one would do it lightly. I watched them process the mystery, piecing together clues that would never lead them to me. Why did you want to talk to me? Asked finally. I don't know anything about high-level investment drama. Dad and Carol exchanged a look. We need help, Dad admitted. Emergency funding. Bridge loans. Something to cover the operational gap until Carol can find replacement investors. I've tapped out my savings and my credit. Carol's family is helping, but it's not enough. We're still short about $800,000 to make it through the next 6 months. The request hung in the air. You want me to loan you money? I asked carefully. If you could. Dad's voice was pleading now. I know you don't have much, but anything would help. Even $10,000 or $20,000. We'd pay you back with interest. I looked at my father. This man who'd spent my adult life dismissing my choices, criticizing my lifestyle, excluding me from his important events. This man who'd just asked his disappointing daughter to help rescue his wife's failing restaurant with money he assumed I didn't have. Dad, I said gently. I can't help you. Melissa, please. I don't have $10,000 to spare. I live paycheck to paycheck, remember? Small apartment, entry-level job, public transit. I repeated his words from the phone call. Someone like me doesn't have emergency funds lying around. His face crumpled. Right. Of course. I shouldn't have asked. Carol closed her laptop. We're desperate. The bank denied our loan application. Every investor I've contacted is spooked by the publicity. I'm trying to be rational, but this is destroying everything I've built. I stood to leave. I'm sorry you're going through this. I hope you figure something out. Wait. Dad followed me to the door. I'm sorry about uninviting you for my birthday. That was wrong. Carol and I discussed it and we both agree it was a mistake. Because now you need money. No. Because it was cruel. You're my daughter. You should have been there. I met his eyes. Should have been there as what? The embarrassing relative you hide in the corner? The one who doesn't fit the brand. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. You've meant it like that my entire adult life. I kept my voice level, factual. I'm your disappointment. The daughter who didn't live up to your expectations. who didn't pursue the right career or marry the right person or achieve the right kind of success. That's not fair. It's completely fair. But here's what you don't understand, Dad. Your definition of success is performance, image, status. You've spent your whole life chasing the appearance of wealth while barely staying afloat financially. You married Carol because she represented the lifestyle you wanted to project. I love Carol. I'm sure you do. But you also love what she represents. And when your biggest investor pulled out, your first thought was to ask your struggling daughter for money you were certain she didn't have. I opened the door. That tells me everything I need to know about how you see me. Melissa. Good luck with the restaurant, Dad. I genuinely hope it survives. I left before he could respond. 2 weeks passed. I watched from a distance as Prestige Dining Group struggled. Carol found some replacement funding, smaller investors' emergency loans, but it wasn't enough to stabilize the business. The negative publicity had done lasting damage. Reservation cancellations piled up. Staff left for more secure positions. The food critics who'd praised the opening couldn't overcome the financial controversy. My phone calls with Dad became less frequent. He was consumed with Carol's crisis, trying to help her salvage what remained. I went about my life, managing my investments, attending board meetings, living quietly. Then Richard called with unexpected news. Prestige Dining Group is filing for bankruptcy protection, he said. The announcement went out this morning. They're attempting a structured reorganization, but the outlook isn't good. I see. Your withdrawal timing was remarkable. If you'd stayed invested, you'd be tied up in bankruptcy proceedings for years. As it is, you exited with full capital intact. Sometimes timing is everything. Indeed. He paused. Carol Henderson has hired a forensic accountant to review the investment structure. She's trying to understand how the withdrawal happened so quickly and whether there were any contractual violations. Were there? None. The investment agreement was clear. You had the right to withdraw at any time with 72 hours notice. Everything was executed perfectly legally. Then there's nothing to worry about. Correct. Though I imagine she'll be very interested to know who her mysterious investor was. I thanked Richard and hung up. The forensic accountant would find nothing improper. The withdrawal was clean, legal, and completely within my rights. Carol would eventually learn that her largest investor had been someone operating through Pinnacle Wealth Management, but the identity would remain protected by privacy agreements and corporate structures. Unless I chose to reveal it. 3 weeks after the bankruptcy filing, Dad called. Carol wants to meet with you. His voice was flat, exhausted. She has questions about your investment history. My heart rate didn't change. Why investment history? She's been digging into the withdrawn funding. Trying to understand who had the capital and connections to invest $3.1 million anonymously. She found something in the documentation, a reference to an M. Anderson entity operating through Pinnacle Wealth Management. I said nothing. Melissa, please tell me it wasn't you. The silence stretched between us. It was you. His voice cracked. You were the investor. You withdrew the funding. Yes. Why? Why would you destroy her business? What did Carol ever do to you? Carol didn't do anything to me. This wasn't about her. Then what was it about? Some kind of revenge because I uninvited you from my birthday party? No, Dad. It was about respect. Respect. He sounded incredulous. You destroyed a woman's life's work over respect? I withdrew my investment when it became clear that the people benefiting from my capital didn't respect me enough to include me in their important events. That's not revenge. That's business. Business? This was personal. You knew Carol needed that money. And Carol could have kept that money if you'd treated me like an actual daughter instead of an embarrassment to be hidden away. He fell silent. I continued, keeping my voice calm. For 2 years I've been Carol's largest investor. I believed in her business plan. I provided the capital that made Prestige Dining Group possible. And when it came time to celebrate your birthday at that restaurant my investment built, you told me I wasn't good enough to attend. I didn't know. Exactly. You didn't know. Because you've spent years assuming I was a failure. You never asked about my work. You never questioned how I afforded my lifestyle. You simply decided I was disappointing and treated me accordingly. If you'd told me, I shouldn't have had to tell you. You should have respected me regardless of my bank account. The fact that you only care now that you know I have money proves everything I already knew about you. Dad's breathing was heavy on the line. Carol's business is destroyed. She's filing for bankruptcy. Her reputation is ruined. Carol's business was unsustainable without my investment. If I hadn't withdrawn funding before the opening, I would have done it eventually when the financial projections failed to materialize. The business plan was solid, but it required that anchor investment to work. Without it, the whole structure collapses. You could have warned us. Given us time to find other options. I gave 72 hours notice as the contract required. I followed every legal protocol. What I didn't do was subsidize people who considered me an embarrassment. I'm sorry. His voice broke completely now. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for not seeing who you really were. I'm sorry for everything. I appreciate that. But apologies don't change the fundamental issue. You love me conditionally, Dad. When you thought I was poor, I was an embarrassment. Now that you know I'm wealthy, suddenly I'm worth respecting. That's not how family works. What do you want from me? Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I wanted a father who valued me for who I am, not what I have. But I learned a long time ago that's not who you are. So what happens now? Now you and Carol deal with the consequences of your choices. You find new investors, restructure the business, or let it fail and move on. That's not my problem anymore. And us. Our relationship. I looked out my apartment window at the city below. I don't know, Dad. That depends on whether you can learn to respect people regardless of their perceived status. Whether you can see value in someone beyond their bank account or social position. I want to try. Then try. But don't expect me to make it easy. I'm done performing for your approval. We hung up. I returned to my laptop, where a pitch deck from a promising clean energy startup waited for my review. Life continued. Prestige Dining Group closed permanently. The bankruptcy proceedings sold off assets to pay creditors. Carol found work as an executive chef at an established restaurant, a significant step down from ownership, but stable and respectable. My father returned to insurance sales. His brief stint as a restaurateur's husband ended. We maintained minimal contact. Dad called monthly, usually brief check-ins that felt more obligatory than genuine. Carol, to her credit, never contacted me directly. Perhaps she understood that any conversation would be painfully awkward. Perhaps she was simply too proud. I continued my work quietly. My investment portfolio grew. I backed 2 more successful startups and sold equity stakes in 3 others. I served on boards, mentored young entrepreneurs, and lived the life I'd deliberately constructed, successful but private, wealthy but understated. The local business community eventually pieced together my involvement in various ventures. A few people reached out, curious about the mysterious M. Anderson behind several successful exits. I declined most meetings. The ones I accepted were strictly professional. My father saw a piece in the Business Journal, local angel investor behind multiple successful startups, that mentioned my name. He called, his voice careful. I saw the article, he said. And I didn't realize the extent of your success. The article mentioned you've backed 17 startups. That your portfolio is worth substantial amounts. Is there a point to this call, Dad? I wanted you to know I'm proud of you. The words should have meant something. Perhaps years ago they would have. But now they felt hollow. The approval I'd once desperately wanted, offered only after proof of achievement met his standards. Thank you, I said simply. Carol and I are separating. The stress of the bankruptcy, the financial pressure. It was too much. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? I am. I never wanted your marriage to fail. I just wanted basic respect. I understand that now. Too late, but I understand it. We talked a few minutes longer, the conversation awkward but civil. When we hung up, I felt neither vindication nor regret. Just a quiet acceptance of reality. Some relationships are conditional. Some people only see value in others through the lens of status and achievement. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is accept those truths and build a life that doesn't require their approval. I opened my laptop and reviewed the next investment opportunity. A young woman with a brilliant idea and no connections, trying to break into an industry that didn't take her seriously. Her business plan reminded me of my own first pitch years ago. Rough around the edges but full of potential. I scheduled a meeting. Not everyone needs to understand your worth for you to be valuable. You just need to understand it yourself. And I did.